Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast.
Last of a Kind. This is Swamp Castle. The title of the story is Last of a Kind by Rhombus Tix. The Church of Theatrical Explosions was in the United States from noon until 7:45 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. Chopstick, head of the order and official caretaker of the shrine, ran it during the day, while his assistant, Moira Dangles, ran it at night. They had managed to evade the IP lawyers thus far, but none of them had thought to defend themselves against the EPA. "No," Chopstick said, "I do not give out free food. I do, however, have a rather extensive sacrament for all members consisting of popcorn, hot dogs, and nachos." "And how do you dispose of these leftovers?" Agent Mimoway asked. "There usually aren't any," Chopstick smiled and shrugged. He was a gangly stick of a youth who had slowly drifted up to the station like flotsam in the wind. Chopstick had a boyish charm, though, and could often convince people against their own judgment. That wasn't working here. "They eat the popcorn bags?" she asked incredulously. "No, of course not. We recycle them." Chopstick gazed at the movie posters over the entrance of the church. Those had been the days. Things had been much simpler in the old days. Mimoway looked disgusted. "Is that sanitary?" "It is after we process them in the autoclave." She put her hand on her hip. "You're telling me you have an autoclave?" "No, we borrow one from the hospital." "That's disgusting. Do you mean to tell me you use the same popcorn bags over and over again?" Chopstick smiled. "Do you have any idea how much it costs to ship anything up here at all? We recycle more stuff than you can imagine. That's why I was so surprised we were getting an EPA inspection. Honestly, I didn't even know the EPA had jurisdiction in space." "The EPA has jurisdiction anywhere in the United States territory, and there are people up here, Mr. Lombard. That means that there are United States citizens in need of protection against environmental hazards." "But surely they didn't send you all the way up here just to check on used popcorn bags." "We both know they sent me up here because they don't like you, Mr. Lombard." She smiled warmly and continued looking around at the chapel. "Well, at least you're honest." Chopstick found himself growing to like the woman. He wondered if she would have dinner with him. Maybe they could catch a show afterwards. "I make it a policy to be. Make no mistake. Just because I know I've been sent up here on a hatchet job doesn't mean I'm not going to apply the axe." Chopstick looked confused. "You just said it's nothing personal. The EPA has priorities. I joined the EPA to protect the environment, the real environment, not a space station. And as long as I'm a useful tool to them, I can protect what little wilderness we have left." "No wonder they call you the new IRS." Chopstick rolled his eyes. "Actually, the IRS just got better." Chopstick smiled. "Not surprised. Well, we're not in violations of any laws that I'm aware of. We have a lot of people helping us out." She smiled. "Yes, I know." "Any other questions I can answer?" "No, none right now." "Of course. Please let me know if I can do anything to further help." He smiled at her and waved as she floated out the door. She was gonna be trouble, all right, but she might be fun, too. He looked at Moira. "Are we gonna make the 7 o'clock showing?" She chewed her gum and pulled her hair while swaying hypnotically in her seat. Umara fidgeted a lot. She said, "Yes." "What are we doing tonight?" Chopstick asked. "Dang Fools 3, and," Chopstick waves his hands as if somehow spiritually drawing the words from her. Sometimes he wondered if he believed his own words too much, subconsciously. "Dang Fools 4? Excellent. Make sure that the sacramental popcorn is ready for the congregation." Umira nodded and headed towards the back to whip up another batch. She pulled her weed-like hair out of her face and washed her hands. She didn't need anyone to tell her how to do their job. She had been Chopstick's first convert and was now his greatest apostle, albeit mainly on the internet. All of the regulars had gathered for the evening, plus a lot of casual members were in attendance as well. The projector was a century old, but had been meticulously maintained by the attention of the local acolytes. The movie began to play, and suddenly everyone went silent. This was what they'd been waiting for, after all. It was sublime, buttery goodness. Of course, the butter was butter substitute, after all. The cows were contaminated now, and goat milk made really crappy butter anyway. Not that movie theaters had used real butter in their popcorn for decades either, but only serious movie buffs knew that kind of thing was possible. People, like most of the audience, seated in the chapel. Halfway through the movie, Umira stopped the projector and turned the little slide projector showing a slide that had a red background with a white immaculate lettering that said intermission. "Tell it, Brother Dropstick," someone shouted from the audience. Dropstick stood and moved to the front of the screen. "Welcome, brothers and sisters. Welcome to our weekly gathering of the Church of Theatrical Explosions. Can I get an amen?" Several people in the crowd responded enthusiastically, while a few others looked around with smiles. A handful of the newcomers looked extremely uncomfortable. They had come here to watch this movie, not see this. Someone said, "What is this?" "Pipe down," said one of the more vigilant congregation members. "Some of you may want to know what the Church of Theatrical Explosions is all about. Well, brothers and sisters, I'm here to tell you all about it." There was a large chorus of amens from the congregation. "There's a darkness in the land below. That darkness is called the Digital Tricentennial Decency Act. It prevents those who seek the light of Hollywood's thunder from seeing sex or violence of any kind." More amens from the congregation, along with a few hisses and boos. "All seem lost, but lo, hark! A loophole in the DTDA that lets religions have an exemption from copyright laws as long as they were of a religious nature. And lo, the Lord did inspire his servant to build a church in his name and manifestation of his holy will. Behold," Dropstick waved his hands wide from the walls of the theater. "Behold, behold! Now we have a chapel where we can worship the Lord as intended, with popcorn and with butter and with overpriced candy, where we could pick it up a lot cheaper in a grocery store. Amen!" O'Mara began to pass out the collection plate for maintenance of the projector while the congregation sung the theme songs from various old television shows in the hymnal. She enjoyed her job, but sometimes she got a gleam in her eyes that scared some members of the congregation. She actually thought they believed in it religiously, which frightened her to no end. She tried to focus on just the important parts. Once they'd passed out the sacramental popcorn, they started the movie again. Everyone had a good time, but Dropstick was nervous. He knew the inspector was going to be back tomorrow, and he didn't have a clue what he was going to do about it. The pounding on the door grew much more intense each moment. Dropstick silently wished that he had had a hangover due to alcohol consumption, but there were enough purists with the regular that they didn't want to push their luck any more than they had to. He opened the door. Agent Memaway stood in the door and handed him a piece of paper. "You're to shut down operations immediately." She smiled and shook her head sadly. She had curves in all the right places, but her face wasn't cute. She refused surgery, but she knew how to increase male verve when she wanted. She was almost tempted, but this would work just fine. "What?" Dropsticks took a moment to read the paper. "What endangered species? There's no the space roach. It appears that insects on the station have naturally evolved as a result of their time in zero G." She started smirking. "You're joking me." "I'm afraid I'm not. I wish I were. I honestly do, but we're going to fight this." Dropstick held up his finger in defiance. "Of course you are. But in the meantime, you have to cease disrupting their habitat." "Oh, I don't think so," Dropstick said. "And you can file this in report." "Oh, I will. Violation of the revised Endangered Species Act is rather severe." She put down her bag and took out a clipboard. She began to write on it. Dropstick thought quickly. He began to read the notice. "It says here that the theater is their natural habitat." "That's correct." "As compared to any place else on the station?" Dropstick smiled. He had her, and she knew it. "We don't want to disrupt other businesses." "Excuse me, but I think you're missing something. Most of the roaches get their food from the church." Memaway paled. Then she looked annoyed. "Look, I wasn't going to make this personal, but if you're going to be difficult, you'll regret it." Dropstick smiled. "I'm not trying to make it personal at all. You're not the first to try and shut us down, and you won't be the last." Agent Memaway scowled and rolled her eyes. She shook her head and then smiled a tiny bit, but sadly. You'll see. Dropstick waved as she walked off. "Yes, I will." The next 3 days were very interesting for Dropstick. Agent Memaway came to the church at least 6 or 7 times with her little clipboard. She kept to herself as she was gaining some great insight into the situation that no one else had yet achieved. Of course, the cameras inside the theater later showed Dropstick that she was only pretending to write down each time she put the pencil to paper. This pattern changed on the 4th day when she came in with a wide variety of sample collection and began scraping the walls, the floor, and the ceiling. Dropstick was fine with all this since it was pretty negligible, but he got annoyed when she put a scratch in one of the nicer leather seats. Those things were for paying customers, rich people who flew up from the earth for a thrill. This was going to be hard to replace, so he almost didn't say anything until she moved to the projector. "All right, that's it. No more samples." She turned around and smiled. "I'm afraid I need to be able to run a full body of tests. If you won't let me take samples, I can get the court to shut you down." Dropstick thought about this as quickly as he could. He almost had something on the tip of his tongue, something involving bats and rocks, but he couldn't force it to the front of his brain. Finally, he said, "You go ahead and get that court order." Memaway Mimway's grin became all the wider. "Have an excellent day, Mr. Clink." She practically skipped out of the door. Chopstick hated it when people used his last name. He hated people who were jerks. He did not hate small fuzzy animals, but at the moment he wanted to find a way to hack into the global climate network and burn all the remaining nature preserves, like a 5-year-old burning an ant with a magnifying glass. He calmed down and called a lawyer. Chopstick couldn't afford a lawyer, but he couldn't afford to fix the screen either. "Yellow," came a slick, fast-paced voice on the end. "Dudley, do-right, and Dim. This is Dim speaking." "I need a lawyer," Chopstick said. "What for?" "Problems with the EPA. Chopstick tried to think of exactly what he was going to put, how exactly he was going to put this. "Excellent. We specialize in business transactions." "Great. Well, we're not a business, technically." In Chopstick's mind, they were a business. "Who are you?" "We're a church." He waited for an awkward pause. "Same difference to me. What's your problem?" Obviously, he was a very spiritual man. "They want to take samples from our movie screen." "I see. Send me the written statement and I'll see what I can do." Chopstick sent the written statement. The estimate of the law firm was thankfully small, but still large enough that he couldn't afford it. He thought about it for a few seconds, then he looked at the movie screen, then looked at the bill, then he looked at from the bill to the movie screen. He hired the lawyer, but not without cost. As a scholar of cinematic history, Chopstick knew that there was a time when "I'd have given my right arm for that" had been a joke. It wasn't anymore. Of course, with the VAT-grown replacement, no one was going to notice the difference, but there were enough people that insisted on original parts that it was still a thriving market. It was the last original piece of himself that he could sell. Agent Mimaway tried one last time by filing a motion with the head of the station complaining about the decibel levels and the adverse effect of noise pollution might have on the station's inhabitants. It didn't help her cause that Director Givens was an avid movie buff himself. He was a citizen of the EU, so he was not a member of the congregation, but he was still a big fan. She gave up in frustration. It wasn't going to work. The Decency Committee had sent 12 men here before her, and all of them had failed. What had made her think that she was going to succeed? No one cared about the environment these days. Global warming? Fixed. Extinct species? You could order one in a mail order catalog. Wide open spaces? Try outer space. Was she really that much of an anomaly? Was it really that unreasonable to care for one of the last pristine areas of the U.S. was going to be converted into a recreational Armageddon zone? Her deal had been to buy Yellowstone another 5 years of relative safety in exchange for shutting Chopstick down. She had run out of options as an EPA agent, but she considered her array of options as a human being. Tears? Loosening her shirt in just the right way? She had figured the first thing that she had to do was get to know her opponent, something she should have done in the first place. Tears went from tactical option to mandatory when she walked to the church theater when they were playing Ghostbusters at precisely the moment the EPA agents shut down the container grid and unleashed chaos upon the city. She sat down in the back and wiped her eyes as quickly as she could. It wasn't her fault. She wasn't the bad guy here, damn it. As she looked up and around, she noticed just how much fun everyone was having, and for the first time she wondered about the scientific studies linking movie violence to cancer. Some of these people had probably been watching movies for years, and not one of them had any visible skin lesions. There would not be a better time to find out why they did and what they did than to observe them while they were unaware of being watched. The movie ended and the parishioners stood around talking for a while. A few attempted to engage her in polite conversation, but she ignored them. Finally, Chopstick himself came by and sat in the chair opposite her, asking her what was the matter. "You know what's the matter," she said. "I've lost." Chopstick looked at her face and without a hint of guile said, "Well, I wish there was a way for us both to win. Unfortunately, these days, most grounders don't know their ass from a stick in the ground." She smiled slightly at that. "No, I guess that they don't at that." Chopstick said, You do know that some stations are trying to create nature preserves, don't you? It's not the same. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm glad that someone somewhere is trying to preserve something. But it isn't about the animals or plants being alive. It's about keeping something wild in the land. She sighed and looked out the window wistfully. Elmira came up to behind both of them and said, "We should make a movie." Chopstick turned around and said, "What do you mean?" She said, "You know." "No, I really don't." She rolled her eyes. "What I've always been telling you?" Mimaway looked back and forth between the two and said, "Well, I don't know what you mean. Are you talking about some kind of documentary?" Elmira smirked and said nothing. Chopstick smiled goofily and glared at her, racking his brain for an answer, and then a look of comprehension dawned on his face. "Of course." Elmira's smug grew wider. Mimaway tried her best to remain calm, but was not far from failing. "What precisely are you two talking about?" Chopstick smiled. "We're going to make a movie." Memaway screamed. The Proselytize America Act of 2019 allowed a major religion to send its works to anyone via any medium without government oversight. The Church of Theatrical Explosions had never sought membership in numbers before, but once they did, the results were amazing. Memaway looked at the printed page. I can't believe it. Chopstick chuckled. Neither can I, really, but there it is. That very night, they had sent a viral email out to people asking them to become members of the church. They had increased their membership 1,000-fold. Right now, they had more members than any of the more traditional Christian denominations. Congress was scrambling to change the legislation of the PA Act, but they wouldn't be able to do it before they'd finished their first movie. Memaway looked down at her costume. Do I really need to wear this? Chopstick and all the male members of the crew nodded sagely. Yes, you do. Why was that again? Chopstick said, It's a replica of the one worn by Princess Leia in Return of the Jedi. It has important symbolic and cultural value. And that cultural value would be? Omira said, sex sells. Chopstick snickered, but he stopped when Memaway slid off the parade float and began to walk towards the door. Wait, there's more context to it than that. Memaway stopped, but Chopstick could tell that it was going to have to be good. What? Context. Well, sex sells is something like it. There's a debate among the faithful about how proud of the human body versus the need of free reign of capitalism. But what it really does is bring a sense of nostalgia to a simpler time that directly spits in the face of the current powers that be. Memaway smiled. Which is a convenient justification to put me in a bikini. Chopstick looked as innocent as possible and said, Roll camera. Memaway went back to her place and redid the take for the 30th time. Are all of you tired of having other people tell you what to do? Then why not demand a change? Take back your proxy and vote for yourself. Wouldn't you rather have the old days of sex, sin, and decadence back? She walked over to a badly reproduced copy of an ocean scene while she was on the beach. And why not enjoy it on the beach, a pristine beach that hasn't been forced to reclaim it all from the sand from artificial quarries? Why not enjoy the real thing? Next, she watched in front of a screen showing a titanic mountains like the Himalayas. Why not ski Mount Everest in real snow? They shouldn't have to import it from the snow factory. And why not enjoy titanic explosions all around you as you observe them through the augmented reality glasses, just like your grandparents did? She stood in front of the pyramids. Why not ski down the sand dunes while horrific alien sacrifice takes place around you? It's nature and it's nurture. When she'd done this, she smiled. Her smile vanished and she looked at Chopstick. I don't know if this is a good idea. Chopstick smiled. Trust me. You'll see. It'll work. I think you're mixing the wrong messages. I don't think people are going to like this. They didn't. While the theocracy had suppressed a lot of ideas from the public, it always had been with its tolerance. America allowed itself to be enslaved, not the other way around, and while there had always been a closeted tolerance for ideas like the Church of Explosions and protective environmentalism, they also hated being blatantly manipulated. These days, ideas required a subtle touch, and Chopstick's movie was anything but subtle. After 5 days, the movie appeared on all the mainstream media outlets. The outrage was extreme. People wanted blood, and they were focusing their wrath on the Church of Theatrical Explosions. So it was to no one's surprise when the church was blown to smithereens. Most people considered it ironically appropriate. Chopstick stared at the ruined hole where the church had been. He was glad no one had been inside at the time. He smiled. We'll just have to rebuild. Memaway nodded. Yeah, it's kind of weird. I don't understand it, but while most people hated it, you actually got thousands of new hardcore followers. Chopstick nodded. We're looking at the moon now. I don't blame you, by the way. Blame me for what? Blowing up the church. Memaway looked shocked and hurt. Chopstick, I would never save it, Agent Memaway. I saw you plant the explosives the night you first came in to watch Ghostbusters. I don't understand why you helped us with the message at all. I mean, now thousands of teenage boys have your movie to watch on a regular basis. If you planned on blowing up the theater, why help us at all? Memaway got a wry grin and shrugged. Because I really meant it when I said it wasn't personal, Chopstick. I really want you guys to succeed. I like movies with explosions in them. I just like wild, untamed spaces more. Chopstick nodded. Do you really think they'll keep their part of the deal? They will if they don't want the tape I have of them giving me authorization to use explosives on a church to go public. Memaway stepped into the airlock of the waiting ship. Chopstick said, Well, you're welcome any time. Look me up if you ever come topside again. Memaway, now chief ranger of the final national park, said, I'll do that if I ever come topside again. Something told Chopstick she probably wouldn't. She loved her park too much. So, I remember this story with great fondness because I do love the idea of the Church of Theatrical Explosions. And this is one of those stories that's built entirely around a gimmick that I get on my ideas list and that eventually get around to writing. And it is, make no mistake, a gimmick. But, given the dark times we live in where fascism is rearing its ugly head in America, and it's a very real possibility, I could see a time where the only free movie theater left is in space and takes advantage of a loophole carved out for churches. So there's that. There is a common theme between this and a couple of the chapters when I wrote the second novel that, I've always prided myself in writing realistic and three-dimensional female characters, and I still do a pretty good job of that, but I'll flat out be honest. 20 years ago, more like 15 years ago, my understanding of female sexuality was not as good as it is now. And yeah, it bothered me in this, but the way she ends it, where Mimaway basically gets away on top, makes this story acceptable to me, in a way that, like, for example, Wake Up Yuli did not. But it still bothers me. If I wrote it again, it would be far more subtle, dial it down. The bikini element is fun, and especially knowing that she's doing it as a deliberate distraction so she can blow up the church to save Yellowstone Park. That's fine. A male being obsessed with a female sexuality is totally realistic because, let's be honest, men are men, or at least many are. Many, get it? Anyway, but the point is, overall, I would give this story a B-, maybe a B. It's obvious why it didn't ever escape a slush pile, but it's enjoyable.
This has been the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. Buy my book, Have Name Will Travel, at Amazon and other markets. RedAnvilCreative.com contains all our podcasts. Copyright
2022!
To fight the forces of evil!